Hello, I'm Anthony David Hobbs, and this is my review of Blackadder the Third. As the title suggests, yes, it's the third season of the Blackadder series. And, I remember this was the first series that I watched properly, basically. Yes, every episode, yeah. And it was supposed to have Tim McInerney, the actor that plays Percy in the Blackadder and Blackadder 2, but he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to play. He wanted to vary the different acting roles he had. He didn't want to be typecast. I believe he played Eric the Viking in the film later in the 80s. Yeah. However, he was a good sport. He agreed to do one episode, and that's it. So, in other words, Hugh Laurie wasn't the first choice to play the Prince Regent, Prince George. Yeah. Well, Hugh Laurie, although he had done a lot of comedy on television before, this was his first really breakthrough role. This made him a household name, yeah. And he later went on to do that show, A Bit of Fry and Laurie, yeah. So in other words, yes, Hugh Laurie, this was his first major role. And as I said, Tim McInerney, he was in one episode. The actress that played Elizabeth I, she was in one episode, and Stephen Fry was in one episode as well. So yes, there are connections between this and the second series, yeah. Mrs. Miggins becomes a regular character. I think she's in almost all the episodes, actually, because she owns like a kind of restaurant and or coffee bar, a cake shop, a place like a kind of pub, like a meeting place. So when Blackadder has to meet a new character in the episode, he goes to Mrs. Miggins' cake shop or coffee shop, yeah. And we have references to Mrs. Miggins in Blackadder 2, but we never actually see her. So I'm guessing this Mrs. Miggins, this is a descendant of the Mrs. Miggins from the previous show, yeah. And, the formula is more or less the same as what we had in Blackadder 2. We have servants and we have someone that has all-knowing and all-powerful, has absolute power over life and death over everything, yeah. And Queen Elizabeth I, very spoiled little brat. Prince George, quite spoiled, yes, and also quite a buffoon, yeah. Or is he a buffoon? I mean, think about it for a while. If you had that level of power and you're surrounded by servants and sycophants, people that agree with everything you say, you don't need to be very clever, do you? Because people just agree with anything you say. Or would he be stupid even if he wasn't a prince? Well, that's up for debate, yeah. But which is the best ever series of Blackadder? Well, most fans agree it's Blackadder 2, definitely. But me, when I was 7 years old, I liked the third one best. I don't know. I just thought there was something like this great comradeship, like they're all getting on. And yes, when I was 7 years old, give me a chance. I was only 7. I didn't know that they were servants and that he was a prince. I just thought they were all good friends that all get along well together. Well, in a way, I was sort of half right. Yes, I suppose sometimes you can get along well with your servants, yeah. I mean, put it this way, Blackadder insults his servant Baldric a heck of a lot. But I think deep down he likes him because he needs someone to make him look important, make him look superior. And he needs servants to do that in the same way Prince George needs his servants, yeah. Now, at the time, the story is set, it doesn't specify the exact year, but around about the year 1794, so yes, the late 18th century. King George III was going through spouts of insanity, so he'd be mad, then normal, then mad, then normal. But he was going completely doolally in the late 18th century. His madness has got, yeah. So in other words, they need a regent, someone to rule until he gets better. So that's why Prince George is now the Prince Regent, yeah. And, yes, it is similar to Blackadder 2, but one of the big differences is Blackadder is not a lord. No, he's just a butler. Quite a well-off butler, yes, quite rich. He serves the Prince Regent. Nevertheless, he doesn't have the same level of power as he had before. And Baldric is his servant, so he's a servant that has a servant. Okay, that's how rich and powerful the prince is. He has servants for his servants, yeah. And but of course, Blackadder is very frustrated and angry. I'm way cleverer than the Prince Regent, Why don't I have a great position of power? It's not right, it's not on, yeah. Nevertheless, he does love his job, oh yes, and whenever the prince gets into trouble, he thanks him a lot or raises his salary. Oh yes, there's great benefits to being a servant. It's not all bad, yeah. And the first ever episode, called Dish and Dishonesty, because, of course, more or less this time, Jane Austen, I think she got famous a few years later, in the early 19th century. But anyway, she had two famous books called Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. So that's why the episodes have names like that. It's a pun on Jane Austen, yeah. We have a great Georgian theme tune at the beginning and all these books in the library in the opening sequence, yeah. Anyway, the first episode, all about an election. It was broadcast in 1987, and in Britain there was a general election that same year. Oh, how apt, yeah. And in those days, you could only vote if you owned a certain stretch of land and you earned a certain amount of money, so a lot, basically, like you earn, about 40 shillings a month, which was a lot of money back then. And sometimes you had to be not necessarily the nobility, but you had to own a lot of land. You had to have money and land, basically, yes. In the belief they were the only ones that had the right to vote. So it shows how times have changed a heck of a lot, yeah. In the next episode, it's ink and incapability. And I do remember when I was a little boy, did something a bit naughty. There was a dictionary. It wasn't brand new. It was a second-hand book in a big box full of old books. And on the front, it said the Spanish English Dictionary. And I crossed that out with a felt-tip pen and wrote Blackadder the Third. A bit naughty, yes, but without realising it, I'd done something a bit symbolic. Because there is an episode all about a dictionary, yes. And yes, although it's a silly comedy, it does sometimes do justice to actual historical fact. Dr. Samuel Johnson was the first person ever to write a dictionary. It took him 10 years. And, a lot of people told him not to do it. It's a stupid idea. Why would anyone want to read? I know what English words mean. I speak English, But he, nevertheless, undeterred, he was determined to do it. And yes, the rest is history, if you'll forgive the pun. Because, yes, it worked. Yes, the dictionaries all over the world. Everyone loves dictionaries, yeah, because before dictionaries, you just told people what words meant, passed down through word of mouth. But when there's some dispute as to what a word means, well, consult the dictionary. That's what you do. And, of course, how do you spell words? Yeah. And the meanings of words change through time. Sometimes a word means something completely different 300 years later. So yeah. And Baldrick accidentally burns the dictionary. He's told to burn any paper rubbish. But since he's a clueless moron, he doesn't know. But he comes up with an answer. He says to Mr. Blackadder, why don't you rewrite the dictionary? Blackadder's like, you want me to rewrite the dictionary inside one evening? The dictionary that took Samuel Johnson 10 years to write. Well, that's the best plan we've got, so that'll have to do, yeah. And, because he's not a lord, Baldrick can't call him my lord. Instead, he calls him Mr. B. I said B, the letter B. I didn't say Mr. Bean. No, just Mr. B. But the actor went on to play Mr. Bean. But no, that came later. And he says, something wrong, Mr. B? Like that, yeah. And then we have the episode about the French Revolution, which had the Scarlet Pimpernel. And this is a bit personal for me because, yes, if it wasn't for the Scarlet Pimpernel, I probably wouldn't exist because he rescued some of my ancestors. Yes, so yeah, that's very significant as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, basically, all these French aristocrats, some of them were innocent, hadn't committed any crimes, but they were guilty by association, and they were all being slaughtered, massacred, and nobody was doing anything about it. Well, the Scarlet Pimpernel was. He was like kind of superhero, yeah, rescuing them, or secret agent. Now, Blackadder, he says that's not all that impressive. Yeah, he's not impressed by things, like in the previous series and the next series. Yeah, Blackadder's not impressed by people that are really impressive for their time. He's not impressed with the man that writes a dictionary. He's not impressed with the actors. He's not impressed with the highwayman. And he's not impressed with the Scarlet Pimpernel. He says, that's easy. Anybody can do that. And to demonstrate how easy it is, he thinks, I'll do it myself. And he says goodbye to the prince, or dare I say it, friend. Goodbye, Blackadder, or dare I say it, butler. That's the nicest compliment you're going to get out of Prince George, yeah. And then they don't go to France at all. For a whole week, they just relax in the servants' quarters. And Baldrick's like, aren't we going to France? No, it's very dangerous. Instead, they find a Frenchman that's already in England and pretend they've rescued him. Yes. Yeah, and make a lot of money. And because they place a kind of bet that whether or not it can be done. In other words, although Blackadder says it's not impressive, if he doesn't do it himself, by that logic, it is impressive, yes, and very dangerous. But yeah, so sometimes he deflates people, even though technically what they do is impressive, yes. Well, he just says stuff to big himself up, doesn't he? Yeah. And then we have the episode all about the actors, and that's yes, we have an actor. I think he's called is it Kenneth Moore or Kenneth Connor? Well, the bloke that was in Hello Hello, which was a popular show at the time, and he was in a lot of Carry On films. Because the two writers, Richard Curtis and Ben Elton, they grew up with Carry On films. So yeah, they put an actor from the Carry On films in it. Yeah, it's like a mark of respect to comedy writers from the past. Yes, that sort of connects the different genres together. Yeah, and oh yes, and as I said, they do some justice to historical stuff as well. Like when an assassin attempts to kill the prince, he doesn't realise the bomb is meant to kill him. It doesn't kill him. He thinks the anarchist is after Blackadder. And Blackadder says, I think it was you he was after, sir. Whatever makes you think that? Well, my suspicions were first arose by his use of the words death to the stupid prince. Yes, Prince George is a bit delusional. He can't imagine anyone hating him. He thinks he's absolutely wonderful, yeah. But he says, well, what are these oppressed masses so worked up about? They're worked up, sir, because they're absolutely starving to death. Oh, yes, and in episode 1, someone's trying to bankrupt the prince. Blackadder doesn't want that to happen, but I thought he hated the upper classes. If the prince is bankrupted, he'll lose his job and his position of power. Oh, that's why. So he cares about himself more. In other words, yes, although they're master and servant, they're one benefits from the other. So that's why they sometimes help each other. And that's why Blackadder helps the prince get out of trouble, because he doesn't want to lose that fantastic job, yeah. So although they have like this love-hate relationship, they do sometimes get along, yeah. And anyway, when the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution happened, yes, the working class man was getting really powerful. And naturally enough, the King and the Prince of England, they were worried the same thing would happen to them. Yeah, so yeah, you've got to do something to make yourself more popular, big yourself up, yes. So he has to give this big, fine speech to make himself more popular and get in your people's good books, basically, yes. And then we have the episode of The Highwayman. It's technically a woman in disguise, yeah. Oh, but before any of that, Prince George has been squandering all his money because that's what he does. Yes, he was a party animal, yeah. The actor that plays him was quite skinny, Hugh Laurie. Although technically speaking, Prince George, well, when he was regent, he was really fat and unhealthy, and yes, he really let himself go, yeah. Yeah, but it is made clear that Prince George loves the party lifestyle. Spent so much money, in fact, he has little or none left. Well, how's he going to pay his servants then? So then he asks, the butler, Blackadder, well, what can I do? He says, well, you don't have any good working skills. You're going to have to marry money, yes. So Prince George writes this poem for a beautiful rich lady, and it has terrible sexist content, really vulgar and coarse. I can't imagine it winning anybody's heart. Nevertheless, Blackadder is polite. He says, this poem is very moving, sir. Would you mind if I just change one tiny element of it? What's that? The words? And of course, yes, then the highwaywoman, that's really a lady, kidnaps Blackadder and says to him, I don't want to marry the prince. No, can't you see it's you I want? I want a man who can sew on a button, someone really suave and sophisticated. Why don't you steal a load of loot off the prince and meet me back here tomorrow at midnight and we'll run off together and live the high life in the Bahamas? I don't know. I'll have to think about it. I thought about it. It's a brilliant plan. So yes, given half the chance, yes, Blackadder would zoom off and live the high life. He wants to better himself, yeah, become more rich and more powerful, yeah. And so yes, although there's this love-hate relationship between the characters, they find ways to get along. And one bit that's quite funny, the last episode, Duel and Duality, the butler and the prince have to switch places, so disguise themselves as each other. So the prince is disguised as a servant. When he does the slightest thing to annoy the duke, he punches his face, knocks him to the ground, beats him up really savagely, yeah. Now that's funny because the prince has never been punched in his entire life, so this is a whole new experience for him. He's finding out what life is like on the other side, yeah. Okay, so to sum it up, Maybe not as good as Blackadder 2, but the next best thing. Lots of jokes, lots of laughs. And they have this love-hate relationship, the master and servant and all that. But ultimately, they benefit from one another, so they get along, yeah. And the best compliment you can get out of Prince George: thank you for saving my life. How can I ever thank you, Bladder? Well, you can start by not calling me Bladder, sir. Okay, thank you for watching. I'm A.D. Hobbs, and I'm never bored.